The fluorescent light above pump 3 has been flickering for 6 weeks. I've put in 3 separate maintenance requests. 3. And every time, the area supervisor, a guy named Greg, who drives a Kia and has never worked a pump in his life, emails back saying it's on the schedule. 6 weeks of that light buzzing and dropping out every 40 seconds. Like it's dying and coming back to life, dying and coming back. And I've stopped even noticing it anymore. That's how quiet the nights are out here on Route 9. You stop noticing things that would drive a normal person insane. My name is Owen. Owen Caffrey. 29 years old. Night shift attendant at Farley's Gas & Go, which is not actually owned by anyone named Farley anymore. Farley sold it to a regional chain in 2019, and the chain kept the name because changing the signage cost money. I've worked here 3 years. Before that, I did 2 years at a tire shop, and before that, I spent 1 deeply regrettable semester at community college, studying business administration, before I realized I hated sitting still. So here I am. Route 9, about 4 miles outside of Dillon, which is a town of roughly 8,000 people, if you count the trailer parks on the east side, which the census does, and most of the residents prefer you don't. It's a slow job. That's the honest truth of it. Friday and Saturday nights you get some action truckers coming through, people heading back from the bar in town, teenagers buying energy drinks and acting like they're not going to try to steal something. But Sunday through Thursday, especially after midnight, it's mostly just me, the flickering pump 3 light, a radio that only gets 2 clear stations, and whatever I've brought to read or watch on my phone. I was on shift the night it started, obviously. That's why I'm telling this story, isn't it? If I'd been home in my apartment with my half-dead succulent and my 4-month-old leftovers in the fridge, this would be a very different account. But I was here, 11:47 p.m. on a Wednesday, technically Thursday already, leaning against the counter eating a bag of Doritos that I'd pulled from the rack because I forgot my actual dinner at home. And that's when everything started going sideways. I want to tell you exactly what that night smelled like before I get into the rest of it, because I think about it still. The store always has this particular smell, fuel fumes that never fully leave, even indoors, mixed with whatever cleaning product the day shift uses on the floors. This pine sol adjacent stuff that smells like someone tried to make a forest and gave up halfway. And underneath all of that, the specific dry warmth of the hot dog roller that I kept running, even when there were no customers, because the silence bothered me. I had 2 hot dogs rotating on that thing that I had 0 intention of eating. They'd been going for 4 hours. They smelled like the concept of food rather than actual food. The radio behind the counter, a chunky plastic thing, FM only, duct taped to the shelf because the day shift manager knocked it off once and cracked the housing, was playing the country station. Not good country, not the old stuff, but the new mid-range country that sounds like pop music wearing a cowboy hat. I wasn't really listening. I'd tuned it out the way you tune out the flickering light and the roller and the refrigerator units humming in the back. And then the station cut out. Not like a signal dropout. I've had those. They're different, they're static, then the music bleeds back in. This was a clean cut. Silence for about 2 seconds. And then a voice. Not a DJ voice, but one of those flat emergency broadcast voices. The kind that sounds like it's being read by someone who was woken up in the middle of the night and handed a script. I didn't even fully hear the first part. I was looking at my phone. Something about a public health advisory. Something about incidents in 3 counties. I remember I looked up at the radio like looking at it would help me hear it better, which is a completely idiotic thing to do, but I did it anyway. The broadcast was maybe 45 seconds. Then the country music came back, same song, right in the middle of the chorus like nothing had happened. I stood there for a second. Then I picked up my phone and checked the local news app, which loads about as fast as you'd expect for a news website serving a town of 8,000. Took a full minute. Then there was one story, posted 40 minutes ago, from the Dillon County Record. I won't pretend I remember the exact headline, but it was something about reports of violent incidents near the county hospital. The article was 4 sentences long and ended with the words, "Authorities are advising residents to remain calm," which is always such a great sign when you read that. Authorities are advising you to remain calm. Nothing calm-inducing about that phrase at all. I put my phone down and ate another Dorito. Here's the thing about working nights alone for 3 years. You develop a certain relationship with your own anxiety, where you learn to sort it into categories. There's the low-grade anxiety that's always there. The background noise of being a 29-year-old who isn't sure what he's doing with his life. Then there's the situational anxiety, like when you can hear a car doing donuts in the lot, and you have to decide whether to call it in or just wait and hope. And then there's what I describe as actual threat anxiety, where your body does something different, where it goes still in a way it doesn't normally go still, where you hear something and something primitive in you says, "Pay attention." Now, I felt a version of that third one when the broadcast cut in, but it was faint. It was easy to dismiss, so I dismissed it. 40 minutes later, a car came off Route 9 too fast, missed the entrance, hit the curb, bounced back, and pulled up to pump 2 with the driver's door hanging open before the engine was fully off. The woman who got out was maybe 50, maybe older. She was wearing a cardigan and jeans, and one shoe. Just one. Her left foot was in a sneaker, and her right foot was in a gray sock that had gone brown at the heel. She was not crying, but her face had that look past crying. The look where you've already used all of those up. She came straight inside. Didn't look at the pumps. Came straight to the counter. "You need to lock that door," she said. Her name was Patty Holbrook, as it turned out, though I didn't know that yet. She was from Dillon proper, from the nicer side near the library. She'd been driving her sister's car because she'd left her own in the hospital parking lot 3 hours ago when she ran. "What happened?" I said. Not a question exactly. More like I was saying it to buy time. "The hospital," she said. "Something happened at the hospital." She put both hands flat on the counter. They were shaking, but gently, not dramatically. People were attacking other people in the waiting room, just attacking them, biting them. She stopped. She looked at me like she was waiting for me to say something that made it make sense. "I didn't have anything. I had my sister there," she said. "She went in for a procedure this morning and I was waiting. And then..." She stopped again. Her jaw went tight. I couldn't get back to her. They wouldn't let me back. And then people started running and I ran. I looked at the door. Through the glass I could see pump 3, the flickering light doing its thing. I could see the road. Nothing on it. "Is anyone following you?" I said. "I don't know," she said. "I don't think so. I don't know." I went and locked the door, turned the deadbolt, the one we're supposed to use after 2 a.m. anyway. It was barely midnight, but I turned it. Then I stood there with my hand still on the lock and thought about what Patty had said. "Biting." She said biting. I thought about the emergency broadcast. I thought about the 4-sentence article ending with "Authorities are advising you to remain calm." "Okay," I said. I went back behind the counter. "Do you want some water?" She stared at me. "Sorry," I said. "I don't have a better response right now. Do you want water or not?" She said yes. I got her a bottle from the cooler. She drank half of it standing there. Then she sat down on the floor with her back against the cooler unit, which is not a comfortable place to sit, but she sat there like her legs had made a decision without consulting her. I pulled up the news on my phone again, refreshed the local page. 2 new articles now. One from the County Record, one from a regional paper. The County Record headline said, "Multiple reported injuries near Dillon General Emergency Services responding." The regional one said something about isolated violent incidents across 3 counties and mentioned the words "possible toxin" and "unknown pathogen" in a sentence that was otherwise pure press release gibberish, the kind of sentence that's been carefully written so it says nothing while appearing to say something. Then I went to Twitter, or whatever it's called now. I still call it Twitter. And that was a different experience entirely. Twitter wasn't carefully written. Twitter was people filming things on their phones and uploading them and writing things like, "What the hell is happening? And why is my neighbor doing this? And they are not normal. They are not acting normal. Someone call somebody." The videos weren't high quality. Most of them were shaky and dark and shot in that panicked portrait mode where you only get a narrow slice of what's actually happening. But I watched 3 of them before I put my phone face down on the counter and just stood there for a second. "How far is the hospital from here?" I said. Patty, from the floor. "About 4 miles, maybe 4.5. 4 miles. Same distance as downtown Dillon. The gas station was at the edge of the cluster, the last stop before Route 9 turned into open road, heading toward the interstate 20 miles north." "And when you left," I said, "was it just the hospital? Or, there was something on Main Street, she said. I drove through it. People running. I didn't stop to look. Okay. I went to the back room, which is a generous name for a space about the size of a large closet. There's a security monitor back there, an ancient thing with 4 grainy feeds inside the store, the pump area, the side lot, and the road entrance. I looked at all 4 feeds. The pump area was empty. The side lot was empty. The road was empty. Nothing was coming toward me. I sat down on the milk crate I use as a chair back there and looked at the monitor for maybe 2 minutes. Then I got up and started thinking practically, which is one of my few actual skills. The gas station, physically speaking. The main store is maybe 600 square feet. 2 rows of shelving, the counter, the cooler units along the back wall. There's a connected small bathroom, a supply closet, and the back room with the monitor. The front is mostly big plate glass windows facing the pump canopy, which is aesthetically fine and practically terrifying in retrospect. The door has a deadbolt. There's a roll-down security gate on the outside that we're supposed to use if the area is under some kind of emergency, which I have never actually deployed in 3 years, because in 3 years, we have never had an emergency. Connected to the store, through an interior door, is the maintenance bay. One bay, big enough for 1 vehicle, with a hydraulic lift that's been broken since before I started. The bay door is a standard roll-up, chain-operated. It faces the side lot. That bay is where we keep maintenance tools, spare parts for the pump systems, and a lot of miscellaneous equipment that various contractors have left behind over the years. Out back is the tank farm, the underground fuel storage. 2 tanks, 1 diesel, 1 regular. They're accessed through hatches in the pavement behind the station. There's also a delivery staging area with a small prefab shed where they keep the manifold equipment and some hoses. And in the maintenance bay, covered by a tarp and technically not supposed to be there, is a cargo van, old white cargo van, maybe 2004 or 2005, Ford Econoline. The guy who does our propane deliveries, a guy named Dennis, left it there about 2 months ago when it broke down mid-delivery. He said he'd come get it. He has not come to get it. I've been using the passenger seat as additional shelf space for my personal snacks. I thought about the van. I went back out to the store. Patty was still on the floor. She'd drunk the rest of her water. "Do you know if your car has a full tank?" I said. She looked up at me. "What? Your car? The one you drove here. Does it have gas in it?" I have no idea." She thought about it. "It had a 1/4 tank when I got in it. Maybe." "Okay, I'm going to fill it up for you. I got the key for the emergency pump override. But I want you to think carefully about where you're planning to go, because 4 miles that direction," I pointed toward Dylan, "sounds like it's getting bad. So wherever you're planning to drive, I'd aim for the interstate." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're very calm," she said. "I'm really not," I said. "I'm just quiet when I'm scared. It's a thing I do." I went out and filled her car. While I was doing it, standing there in the lot with the pump running and the night air coming off the fields, I could hear something from the direction of town. Not clearly, just something. Sirens, multiple ones, and under them something else. Something that wasn't quite sound so much as a quality of the air, a density that felt wrong. I kept looking at the road, nothing on it. Just the empty blacktop and the dark fields on either side. I went back inside, and that's when the second person arrived. He came on foot. Not from the road, from the field to the east, which is just flat, scrubby land between the station and what used to be a soybean operation before the family sold the acreage. He came out of the dark at the edge of the lot, and he was moving in that particular way that makes your body decide things before your brain does. He was not walking normally. He was stumbling in a direction toward the light, toward the store, and one of his arms was hanging wrong, and he had something dark running down the side of his face. I was inside. I was behind the counter. The door was locked. He hit the door with both palms and stood there looking through the glass, and I looked back at him, and I can tell you exactly what I noticed. He had on a dress shirt, white, with a brown stain down the front that wasn't a sauce stain. He was maybe 40. He had the look of someone who had, earlier that day, been a normal person, living a normal life. An office worker, maybe. Someone who drove a sensible car and had a 401k and a stance on home improvement projects. He was not that person anymore. Whatever was going on behind his eyes was not the same thing that goes on behind normal human eyes. There was nothing calculating there, nothing afraid. He was looking at the light the way an insect looks at a light. "Don't open it," Patty said, from behind me. I wasn't going to open it. He stood there for about 30 seconds, hitting the glass with his palms every few seconds, not hard enough to break it, just rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Then something in the parking lot, I think it was Patty's car, the engine was still running, made a sound, and he turned toward it and walked toward it. I watched him through the window as he got to her car, walked around it, hit the hood once with his palm, and then kept going. He walked past the pumps, past the flickering light at pump 3, and disappeared around the back of the building. Patty and I both stood very still. "Okay," I said, eventually. "Okay." I went to the back room and checked the security monitor. I could see him on the rear camera, moving through the staging area behind the station. He walked into the dark of the access road that runs behind the property and disappeared. "Did you lock your car?" I said, when I came back out. Patty looked at me blankly. Then she took a shaky breath. "I don't know." "Go lock it," I said. "The deadbolt on the door has a key slot on the outside. I'll let you out and then back in." 30 seconds. She didn't love this idea. I didn't love it either. But I also didn't love the idea of spending the next unknown number of hours in here with an unlocked car sitting in the lot, because an unlocked car is a resource, and resources matter. We did it fast. She went out, locked her car, came back. I let her back in and locked the deadbolt. The whole thing took maybe 20 seconds. While she was doing it, I stood in the doorway looking at the lot, looking at the road. Nothing else coming. Yet, I went to the supply closet and took stock of what we had. The store inventory was, on a normal night, something like 3 kinds of chips, 2 kinds of crackers, beef jerky and 4 flavor varieties, a wall of candy bars, a cooler full of drinks, sodas, energy drinks, water, sports drinks, a few juice boxes. There were the hot dogs, still rolling, 2 cases of instant noodle cups behind the counter, a little rack of protein bars near the door, 2 loaves of bread, 1 white, 1 wheat, 6 packages of pre-sliced deli meat in the refrigerator section, and a small collection of canned goods in a dusty end cap display that I don't think anyone had bought from in months. Soup, baked beans, a few cans of corn. In the supply closet, cleaning products, rolls of receipt paper, a first aid kit, a flashlight, a box of flares, the road kind, for emergencies, extra coffee cups, a raincoat that belonged to the day shift manager and had been hanging there for a year. In the maintenance bay, tools, a portable air compressor, a set of jumper cables, 3 5-gallon plastic fuel cans empty an old tool chest with a variety of wrenches and screwdrivers, some chain, a crowbar, a sledgehammer, a bag of road salt left over from last winter, some tarps, and Dennis's van. Outside, in the ground, thousands of gallons of gasoline and diesel. That was the thing. That was the one thing the gas station had that no other random building had. Fuel. Whatever happened next, whatever this was going to become, fuel was the thing that would matter. I sat down behind the counter and made a list on the back of a receipt roll. It's an old habit from the tire shop. When things were confusing, you wrote down what you knew, what you had, what you needed. I had food for maybe 2 to 3 weeks if rationed carefully, water in the cooler, though the tap worked fine, tools, fuel, a vehicle, and 1 traumatized 50-year-old woman. What I needed, better information, a plan, possibly help, and, I thought, looking at the glass front of the store, something better than glass and a deadbolt between me and whatever was coming up the road. The night got very long after that. I'll skip the slow parts and tell you the things that happened. Around 1 a.m., 3 more people arrived, 2 together in a pickup truck, 1 alone in a station wagon. The pickup truck was a husband and wife from a farm about 8 miles east, Gary and Diane Pruitt, who had heard the radio and drove toward the highway and stopped at the first lit-up place they saw. They were both in their 60s, both wearing insulated work jackets over pajamas because they'd been in bed when the broadcasts started getting bad. Gary had a rifle in a rack behind the seat of his truck and a box of shells in the glove compartment. He also had 2 dogs, a pair of labs named Rusty and Colonel, who were in the truck bed and were not coming inside regardless of what I said about it. because Gary said they'd be noisy inside, and noise was probably bad right now. The station wagon belonged to a guy named Kyle, 22, who'd been driving home from a party in the next town over and started seeing things on the road about 6 miles back. He described it as people in the road, walking, not getting out of the way of his headlights. He'd slowed down, seen one of them close up, and decided to drive around them at speed. He was still shaking when he came in, holding a can of Red Bull he'd grabbed off my shelf without asking, and then looking at me in a way that meant he'd forgotten you're supposed to pay for things. I didn't charge him. By 1:30, I had 4 adults, 2 dogs outside in a truck, and a growing situation outside that I was piecing together from their accounts and from what was happening on social media and the radio. Dylan was bad. The hospital had been the center of it. But it wasn't the center anymore. It had spread outward from there, in something like a radius. The radio, which had been cycling through emergency broadcasts since about midnight, kept saying, "Remain indoors," and avoid contact with affected individuals, and do not engage, without ever explaining what affected meant, or what engaging looked like in practice. There were no police updates, which was either because the police were busy, or because they weren't doing well either. Gary, who I liked immediately because he was calm and didn't ask stupid questions, said, "My cousin's a deputy. I tried him twice. No answer." We all sat with that for a while. Kyle said, "Do you think it's like..." He stopped. "Say it," I said. "Do you think it's like..." He gestured vaguely at the world. "Zombies," Diane said, with the tone of someone who'd decided they weren't going to be precious about language right now. Gary snorted. Not a funny snort, a tired one. "Biting," said Patty, quietly. "They were biting people, and the people they bit, they weren't acting right after." There was a pause. "Right," said Kyle. "Okay, so zombies." I looked around at all of them. What they are doesn't matter right now. What matters is what they do and what they can't do. From what I've seen, the one that came to the door, he came toward the light. When the car made noise, he went toward the noise. He didn't try to work out how to open the door. He didn't test the glass for weaknesses. He just, I searched for the right word, reacted, like an animal. "Could he be faking?" Kyle said. "Could he be faking that level of brain damage?" I said flatly. "No, people can't fake that." Gary nodded slowly. "So they go toward sound and light." That's what it looked like, which means we keep the noise down, the lights outside. I thought about it. We might need to think about those. The pump canopy lights were on. That was a lot of light, visible from a distance. I wasn't sure yet whether turning them off was smarter than leaving them on, because they also helped me see the lot. It was a problem I filed away to think about later. "What about the fuel?" Gary said, looking at me. "You've got fuel here." "Yes," I said. "That's actually the most useful thing about this place." "Pump pressure working?" "As far as I know." He nodded. "Okay, then we're not leaving yet. We think about this." I liked Gary. He was the kind of person who thought before he spoke and didn't need to be the loudest voice in the room to make a decision land. I'd worked for guys like that, and I'd worked for guys who were the opposite, and Gary's brand of quiet authority was much easier to be in a room with. We turned off the pump canopy lights at 2 a.m. The parking lot went dark except for a small security light above the entrance and the fluorescent leak from the store windows. I'd already thought about the windows. There was a roll-down security gate on the outside of the door, and I deployed it, which helped with the door. But the windows were just glass. I didn't have a solution for the windows yet, beyond the hope that nobody with bad intentions would show up. Around 2:30, a thing happened that I keep coming back to. I was looking at the security monitor, my regular rotation, checking all 4 feeds every few minutes, and on the road feed, I saw a group of them, walking, coming from the direction of Dylan. There were about 12 or 15. I couldn't get a clear count from the grainy feed, but they were walking on the road shoulder, moving north toward the highway, which meant they'd passed the gas station entrance. I went and got Gary, and we stood in the back room looking at the monitor together. He didn't say anything, just watched. They passed the entrance without turning in. The security light above the entrance was dim enough that it didn't seem to draw them, or maybe they just didn't see it. They walked past. All of them. Gary let out a slow breath. "Moving north," he said. "Yeah, Herd behavior, you think? I don't know. Maybe they're responding to something up ahead. Noise from the highway, maybe. I thought about it. Or they just keep walking until something stops them. He thought about that. If they're not stopping here, that's good. But it won't last. If the town empties out, they'll spread. Yeah. How long do you think we have before this station becomes a problem to defend? I appreciated that he phrased it as a problem to defend rather than a death trap. Depends on how many come through and how fast, I said. Right now, with the lights off outside and us keeping quiet, we might be low priority. But the smell of the hot dog roller, I stopped. I'd actually forgotten about the hot dog roller. I went and turned it off immediately, which I should have done an hour ago, but I'd been distracted by everything else. Small thing, big thing. Hard to know which was which in the moment. By 3 a.m., I'd made a series of decisions that I'll lay out here because they form the foundation of everything that came after. 1. Nobody was going anywhere until daylight. In daylight, I could see what was on the road. At night, the advantage was theirs. 2. We needed to think about the maintenance bay. If I could get Dennis's van running, I had no idea if it ran. I'd never tried it. We had a vehicle with a large cargo hold that could carry people and supplies. That mattered. 3. The fuel situation. The tanks had been filled 10 days ago. Our standing order was a top-off every 2 weeks, so we had close to capacity. Regular tank was about 8,000 gallons. Diesel was about 4,000. 8,000 gallons of regular gasoline is approximately how far your car can drive. If your car gets 30 miles per gallon, call it 240,000 miles. That's not a resource you abandon. That's the reason people would come here. 4. I needed to think about that. People would come here for the fuel. Some of them would not ask nicely. I mentioned this to Gary and he went out to his truck, in the dark, quietly, and came back with the rifle and the shells. He leaned the rifle against the counter without any particular ceremony. "Can you shoot?" he said. "I've been to a range twice," I said. "With my dad. We shot cans." "Cans," he said. "Yeah." He looked at the rifle. "Better than nothing." He didn't offer to teach me right then, which was probably wise given the circumstances. But over the next few days, he would teach me a great deal. Diane had made herself useful in the store, while Gary and I were in the back room. She'd gone through the shelves and made an inventory, actual notes on a piece of paper, in careful handwriting of everything we had and its approximate calorie count. She'd worked on a farm her whole life and she approached supply management like a person who'd spent decades thinking about how to feed people through winter. "We have enough for 4 adults for about 12 days at normal eating," she said, showing me her notes. "If we cut portions, maybe 18. If we're doing hard physical work, burn that down significantly." "Water," I said. "The tap's running now. No idea how long that lasts if the town system loses pressure. The cooler has about 60 bottles. I'd start saving every container you can find for tap water while it's still on." I did. I spent about 20 minutes filling every cup, container, and pot I could find from the back room and the bathroom, and lining them up behind the counter. It was the kind of task that felt slightly silly while you were doing it, and would have felt extremely not silly if the water had stopped flowing while you weren't doing it. Kyle, to his credit, helped without being asked. He was still scared, you could see it in the way he kept checking his phone, but he was channeling it into movement, into doing things with his hands. I'd take that over the alternative. Patty had found her footing by 3 a.m. She'd stopped sitting on the floor and was standing at the counter, and she'd eaten one of the protein bars and was drinking coffee from the pot I'd brewed mostly for something to do. She wasn't the type to fall apart for long. You could see it in her. She'd processed the acute shock and was now doing what people like her did, which was getting back to useful. "My sister," she said at one point. Not to anyone in particular. Nobody said anything. There wasn't anything to say. "I know," she said, answering the silence herself. "I know." Dawn came at around 5:40. Not a dramatic dawn, the sky just gradually became less black, then gray, then a flat pale white that let you see the world again. I'd been awake all night. We all had. In the daylight, looking out through the store windows, the gas station parking lot looked completely normal. Empty. Peaceful. The same scrubby fields on either side of Route 9, The same distant line of trees to the north. The same nothing that was here every night. No bodies in the lot. No infected people visible anywhere. Just quiet. I unlocked the front door, stepped outside with Gary's rifle in my hands, held it the way he'd shown me, which felt awkward but at least intentional, and did a circuit of the property. Nothing on the lot. Nothing around the pump canopy. Nothing behind the station, except the staging area and the access road, which ran for about a quarter mile and connected to a county road I'd never had reason to use. I came back inside and said, "Clear for now." Gary nodded. "How far is the nearest store with more food?" "There's a Dollar General about 2 miles back toward town," I said, "on the corner of Route 9 and Miller Road. And there's a farm supply place about a mile past that. 2 miles toward the bad direction." "Yeah," he thought about it. "We wait until full daylight. Then you and I take one vehicle. We go fast and quiet. Grab what we can carry. Come back." "What about them?" "I meant Patty and Diane and Kyle. Diane knows how to handle herself," he said. "She'll lock up behind us. Kyle can help her. Patty," he glanced toward her, "she's steadier than she looks." I went to the maintenance bay and looked at Dennis's van. It was old and it was dirty, and the passenger side mirror was held on with duct tape. And when I got in and tried the ignition, it clicked and groaned and clicked some more before catching, which it did on the 4th try with a sound like a man with a bad chest cold waking up. But it caught. The engine ran rough for a minute and then smoothed out enough. Quarter tank of gas, which I topped off from the pumps before we left. Gary and I did the Dollar General run at 7:15 a.m. I want to describe what that drive was like, because it was the first time I'd actually been out in it. The road looked normal for the first mile. Just road. But then, we started seeing things. A minivan with all 4 doors open, stopped in the turn lane, engine running. A pile of broken glass on the shoulder that I couldn't immediately account for. And one of the infected walking north in the breakdown lane, moving at that same steady, no particular hurry walk I'd seen on the security monitor. She was maybe 70 years old, and she was in a bathrobe, and her head turned toward us when she heard the van, and she reached out one arm as we passed, just reaching, like she could grab us through 6 feet of air. I drove faster. The Dollar General was open. I mean, nobody was there, but the door was unlocked, and the lights were on. We parked around back, out of sight of the road, and went in through the back. I don't know why I felt the need to go in the back rather than the front. It just felt right, less visible. It took us 12 minutes. We moved fast and we weren't selective. We grabbed anything shelf-stable, anything that stored well, anything in cans or sealed bags. Rice, pasta, canned soup, canned beans, canned tomatoes, dry oatmeal, peanut butter, crackers, protein bars, some medications from the pharmacy section, ibuprofen, antacids, cold medicine, bandages. Gary grabbed a section of heavy-duty zip ties and a set of bungee cords for reasons I didn't fully understand yet, but didn't question. I grabbed 2 large water jugs, empty, intending to fill them back at the station. We loaded everything into the back of the van. Gary went through the register, not for money, but because he knew there was sometimes a collapsible safety baton or pepper spray stored under the counter at small stores, and he was right, there was a collapsible baton, which he pocketed. We got back in the van. "Fast and quiet," I said, which is what he'd said before. "Fast and quiet," he agreed. The drive back took 4 minutes because I drove significantly faster than the speed limit. We passed the bathrobe woman again. She'd made it maybe another 100 yards north, and she reached out again as we passed. Exact same gesture. Like a reflex she couldn't help. We got back to the station. Diane had made coffee. I want to pause here and note something about Diane, because she kept making coffee throughout everything that followed, and it seems like a small thing, but it was not. Having hot coffee in a difficult situation it's a morale thing, but it's also a ritual, a structure, a message that says the mundane mechanics of being alive are still happening. Diane understood that without anyone telling her. She just kept making coffee. We unloaded the van and brought everything into the store, added it to Diane's inventory. We were in better shape now. 3 to 4 weeks of food for 5 adults, if we were careful. The water situation was manageable as long as the tap kept running. Then I went to the maintenance bay and started thinking about the van. Dennis's van was, I realized, the most important thing in the gas station. Not the fuel was what made the van useful. The van itself was a big empty space on wheels that could carry people and supplies and be refueled here as many times as needed. It was, functionally, a lifeline, which meant I needed it to be more reliable than it currently was. I know enough about engines to be dangerous, which means I know enough to not break things while I'm trying to fix things. I did a visual check under the hood. Battery looked okay, belts looked okay, hoses looked okay. Nothing obviously wrong except that it was old and tired. The tires were soft but not flat. I put air in them from the portable compressor. While I was doing that, Kyle came into the bay. "Can I help?" he said. "Do you know anything about engines?" "I know how to change oil," he said. "Can you drive a standard?" "Yeah." "Good. Learn this van. Where everything is, how it handles, where it's rough. If I can't drive for some reason, you drive." He nodded. He took that seriously, which was good. Kyle was 22 and still in the mode of life where he was defining what kind of person he was going to be. And in stressful situations, that process either accelerates in a good direction or a bad one. He was trending good. The first full day Thursday passed with a structure I hadn't planned, but that emerged naturally from the 5 of us being in the same space with the same problems. Gary and Kyle checked the perimeter every 2 hours. Diane managed food and water. Patty, who turned out to have worked as a bookkeeper for 20 years, took over the inventory spreadsheet and started tracking calorie consumption alongside estimated days remaining. I managed the vehicles and the fuel systems and spent a significant portion of the day doing something that seemed excessive at the time. I was blocking the windows. The store had 3 large plate glass windows at the front. Big, clear, well lit. I didn't like them. Not because of anything structural, the glass was thick, commercial-grade stuff, but because they were transparent, which meant anyone or anything could see in. I found a stack of cardboard boxes in the supply room, broke them down flat, and used duct tape to cover the inside of the windows. Not perfectly, I left thin horizontal gaps at eye level so I could see out, but enough that the inside of the store was no longer a fishbowl. Gary watched me do this with an expression of mild approval. He didn't say anything, but that was his way of expressing a lot. We had one incident that first full day. At around 2 in the afternoon, a pickup truck came up, Route 9 from the town direction, moving fast. It pulled into the lot. 3 young men, none of whom I recognized. They got out. One of them had a hunting rifle. One had a baseball bat. One had nothing except what looked like a lot of adrenaline. "You the only people here?" The one with the rifle said to me. He was scanning the lot while he said it, which was the part that made my stomach tight. He wasn't asking to be friendly. "There are several of us," I said. I was standing at the door. Gary was inside, out of view, with his rifle. "We need fuel," the rifle guy said. "We're not distributing fuel to individuals right now," I said. He stared at me. "That's a gas station." "It is." "So you have fuel?" "We do, and you're not." He stopped. He looked at his 2 friends, then back at me. "Look, man, we're not trying to start anything. We just need to get to—" "Where are you trying to get to?" I said. "My sister's place, in Reston. That's like 40 miles. That's not very far," I said. "Yeah, well, we've been driving around for 2 hours and every station we found was either picked clean or—" He stopped again. 2 of them had people outside who weren't right. We didn't get out. I thought about it. Gary was inside with his rifle, and that gave me some security. But these 3 were scared, not predatory. There's a difference, and you learn to read it fast. "How much do you need?" I said. "Half tank, that's all. Half tank and we're gone." I thought about the fuel. 8,000 gallons of regular. Half a tank for a standard pickup was about 10 gallons. 10 gallons out of 8,000 was nothing. "Park at pump 2, I said. "Engine off. Leave the rifle in the truck." He looked at me. "Those are my terms," I said. "Otherwise, you keep driving and find somewhere else." He put the rifle back in the truck. I pumped their 10 gallons. They drove away. The whole thing took 6 minutes. Gary came out of the store. He didn't say I made the wrong call. He also didn't say I made the right one. He just stood next to me and watched the truck disappear up Route 9 toward the highway. "We're going to get more of those," he said. "Yeah, Some of them won't have sisters in Reston. Yeah, we went back inside. That evening, around 7 p.m., Patty managed to reach someone on her phone. Not her sister. She'd stopped calling her sister by mid-afternoon, and she didn't talk about it. And none of us pressed her. She reached a woman she knew from her church, who was sheltering at the church itself, which was a brick building on the south side of Dillon. The woman said there were 11 people at the church. She said the town center was bad, but the south side was still mostly okay. She said she'd heard there was some kind of response being organized, but she didn't know where. Patty relayed all of this to us. The response being organized part was the piece everyone latched onto, because it was the first piece of information that suggested something other than total collapse. What kind of response? Gary said. She didn't know, Patty said. She heard it on a radio. Something about the National Guard. I checked my phone. Cell signal was weak. It had been getting weaker since midnight, probably from network overload. I could still get through sometimes, but it was slow. The radio had gone from cycling emergency broadcasts to occasional dead air, which felt worse. Social media was both more and less useful. There was a lot of noise, a lot of panic, but filtering through it, you could find real-time reports from people in the towns around us. What I gathered, the outbreak was not contained. It was not, as far as anyone could tell, slowing down. It had originated at the county hospital, some kind of patient who came in with a bite, which in retrospect says everything, and it had moved outward from there, in a pattern that followed the roads. Small towns on the route to the bigger city, then the bigger city itself. There were reports from the city, which was 40 miles southeast, that were very bad. The National Guard mentioned on the radio. There were checkpoints being established on the interstate, a staging area somewhere to the north, the report said, though exactly where varied depending on which source you believed. I sat with this information for a while. Then I went to the maintenance bay, climbed into the driver's seat of Dennis's van, and sat there in the quiet, with my hands on the steering wheel. The situation, as I understood it at that moment. 5 people in a gas station on Route 9, 4 miles from a town that was compromised, 20 miles from an interstate, some unknown distance beyond that from something that might be a military staging area. We had fuel, we had food, we had a van, we had Gary's rifle, we had a collapsible baton, and we had 4 reasonable adults and 1 somewhat recovered 22-year-old. What we didn't have, a clear picture of what was on the road between here and the interstate, or what was at the interstate when we got there. What we did have, which I hadn't fully accounted for yet, was the gas station itself as an asset beyond just our own needs. 8,000 gallons of fuel. People were going to need that. Survivors with vehicles were going to need that. And maybe this was the thought that started forming while I sat in Dennis's van in the dark of the maintenance bay. Maybe that was leverage. Not just something to protect, something to use. I got out of the van and went back inside and said, I want to talk about what this place can do. They all looked at me. Not just for us, I said. I want to think about this differently. We have fuel. In a situation where fuel is running out everywhere, we have 8,000 gallons of regular and 4,000 of diesel. That's not a coincidence. That's a reason. Gary leaned back against the counter. A reason for what? A reason for people to stop here rather than keep running, I said. A reason for them to help us rather than just take from us. A reason for us to be useful instead of just surviving. Kyle was watching me. You want to make this like a waypoint or something? Something like that. Yes. That attracts attention, Gary said. He wasn't objecting, just noting. It does, I said. But think about it. Isolated, we can last a few weeks. Maybe, with our 5 people and our current supplies. And then we're out of food. We're low on everything else. And we try to move, and whatever is outside is still outside. But if people stop here, if we're organized about it, we have more hands, more resources people bring with them, more options. Diane said, quietly. How many people can this place hold? That was the practical question. The store wasn't big. The maintenance bay added some space, but not much. The answer was, not many, not comfortably. The staging area out back, I said. It's got a prefab shed and a paved section about 50 by 30 feet. And there's that access road to the county road. If we put vehicles back there, out of sight. You're thinking like a camp, Gary said. I'm thinking like a supply depot, I said. There's a difference. A camp is permanent. A supply depot is a stop on a route. He thought about this. Route to what? To wherever that military staging area is. North. On or near the interstate. It was a rough plan. Very rough. But it was a direction. And a direction is worth a lot when the alternative is just waiting. We made 2 decisions that night. First, we'd put a handwritten sign at the road entrance. Not a big sign, just something that said, essentially, fuel and supplies available, organized, and a time 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., not 24 hours. We weren't doing 24 hours. Second, Gary and I would go out in the morning, not just for supplies, but to see what was on Route 9 between us and the interstate. Scout run, Gary said. Scout run, I agreed. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did, really, though everyone found places to lie down for a while. Diane and Patty had the back room. Gary and Kyle alternated watch near the door. I was in the maintenance bay for most of it, sitting in the van and thinking. Just after 3 a.m., I heard something from the direction of the road that I still have trouble explaining. Not an engine, not footsteps, not any sound I can clearly categorize. It was low and continuous, like a very distant crowd of people, all making noise at once. And it was coming from the south, from the direction of Dillon, and it lasted for about 4 minutes, and then stopped. I went to the back room and looked at the security monitor. The road feed showed nothing moving on the road. The field to the east was dark. The access road to the back was clear, but whatever that sound was, it settled in me somewhere and didn't leave. I sat in the maintenance bay until dawn and tried to figure out what it had been and couldn't. In the morning we put out the sign. It was a piece of cardboard from a supply box, written in black marker. Fuel available, organized, 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. pull around back. I hung it on the entrance post with a zip tie from Gary's collection. By 9 a.m., 4 vehicles had come off Route 9 and pulled around back, following the handmade arrow we'd added pointing to the access road. The first was a family mother, father, 3 kids ranging from maybe 8 to 15. Their name was Holton, and they'd come from a suburb 20 miles south that had gone bad fast. They had half a trunk of packed supplies and a full tank of gas already, but they stopped because the sign said organized, and organized was the word that was working on people right then. They didn't want fuel. They wanted structure. The second was a pickup with 2 men and an elderly woman. The men were brothers, Jeff and Dale Briscoe, from a farm north of Dillon. The elderly woman was their mother. They had enough food, but their truck had been making a noise for 60 miles and they were worried about it. I looked at the truck. I'm not a mechanic, but I know enough. The sound was a wheel bearing, not immediately dangerous, but going to get worse. I didn't have the right bearing to replace it, but I tightened what I could, told Jeff it would hold another 100 miles if he didn't push it, and they loaded up with extra fuel and headed north. The third vehicle was a beaten sedan, driven by a 19-year-old girl named Haley Strout, alone. She was heading to her boyfriend's place in a town north of the interstate. She had no food, almost no gas, no supplies of any kind. She'd basically just driven away from her apartment in the clothes she had on. She was not panicked, she was past that, into a kind of hollow blankness that I'd started recognizing. I filled her tank. Diane gave her a bag of food crackers, peanut butter, 2 cans of soup, a water bottle. Patty found a road atlas in the supply closet, the old paper kind that I'd completely forgotten we had, and found Haley the route north. Haley looked at the bag of food and then at Diane, and her eyes went wet, but she didn't say anything. She just nodded. The fourth vehicle was a dark gray SUV with 4 men in it. They pulled around back, got out, and there was something about the way they got out that I didn't like. Not the way a family gets out of a car. The way a team does. I won't overstate what this was. They didn't threaten us, not directly. They said they were looking for fuel. They had fuel canisters in the back. They wanted to fill up and move on. One of them, the one who did all the talking, a guy with a shaved head and a canvas jacket, kept looking around the staging area while he spoke, looking at the shed, looking at the van, looking at how many of us there were. I charged them for the fuel. I charged everyone for fuel, not money, but equivalent supplies. The Holton family had extra baby formula they didn't need anymore because their youngest was past it. They traded that. The Briscoe brothers gave us 2 bags of dried beans. Haley got hers for free because she had nothing. The men in the SUV had guns, not displayed, but there. You could tell. I charged them 20 gallons of fuel for 4 cans of food from their trunk and a box of first aid supplies they had in the back. Canvas jacket guy stared at me for a second. That's a steep trade. That's the rate, I said. He held my gaze for a few seconds, and I held it back, which was not a comfortable thing to do. But I'd decided before they got out of the SUV that I was not going to be the kind of person who looked away first. They made the trade. They drove away. Gary came to stand next to me as I watched them go. They'll be back, he said. Maybe, I said. Or they'll find something easier to take from. They had 4 men and at least 2 rifles. We have 4 people, 1 rifle, a gas station, and 8,000 gallons of something everyone needs, I said. That's not nothing. He didn't disagree, but he also didn't look entirely comfortable. I went inside and thought about the windows some more. I finished boarding up the front windows that afternoon, not boarded, exactly, but covered in a way that made the inside less visible and added 1 layer of something between us and the glass. I was working with what I had: cardboard, duct tape, a couple of plywood sheets I found leaning against the back of the maintenance bay, left by a contractor doing some work 6 months ago. The plywood was better. I used it to cover the lower halves of the 2 largest windows, which meant the upper sections still let in light, but you couldn't easily see inside from ground level. Kyle helped me carry the sheets and hold them while I taped and screwed them, using screws from the tool chest and a battery drill that had about half a charge left. While we were working, Kyle said, "Where do you think those guys in the SUV were headed? North? Probably," I said. "Do you think the military thing is real? The staging area?" "I think someone on a radio said something, and it's been repeated enough times that it's become real, whether or not it is," I said. "Whether an actual National Guard staging area exists," I shrugged. "Hope so. What if there's nothing there?" "Then there's nothing there, and we figure out something else." He was quiet for a minute. "My parents are in Nebraska," he said. "Nebraska's a long way," I said. "I know." I didn't say anything else about it because there wasn't anything useful to say. Either he'd get to Nebraska or he wouldn't. And right now, the most useful thing he could do about Nebraska was stay alive at a gas station on Route 9 until the situation clarified enough to attempt a drive. That night was quieter than the first. We had a structure now, something that resembled a routine, and routine is one of the things that keeps people from going sideways psychologically. Diane cooked. She heated up canned soup on the little coffee station hot plate, which wasn't really designed for that but worked, and we all ate together, which felt absurdly normal, like a camping trip where you didn't entirely choose the campsite. Patty said grace, which nobody expected, and nobody objected to either. After dinner, Gary taught me more about the rifle. Not firing it, we weren't going to fire it indoors for obvious reasons, but handling it, loading and unloading, safety positions, how to hold it when you're moving versus when you're stationary. He was a careful teacher, the kind who explains the why behind every step rather than just the what, and I appreciated that. "Have you ever had to shoot someone?" I said, at one point. He was quiet for a moment. 23 years ago, deer season. A guy came onto our property when we told him not to, drunk, waving a shotgun around. He paused. I didn't kill him. Shot over his head. He left pretty fast after that. "Did it work?" I said. "For him, yeah," he said. He didn't elaborate. We slept in shifts. 2 on watch, 3 off. I took the 3 to 6 a.m. slot because I'd been awake for most of the previous night anyway, and my internal clock was already wrecked. The second full day, Friday, was when things started getting complicated in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. The sign on the entrance post attracted 14 vehicles. Some of them were what we'd seen the day before. Families, individuals, people moving through with specific destinations. We filled tanks, traded supplies, gave what information we could, sent them north. One family had a medical situation. The father had a gash on his forearm, not a bite. He'd cut it on broken glass climbing through a window. Diane cleaned and bandaged it while I filled their tank. The wound looked okay. Clean edges. No signs of anything worse than what it was. 2 of the 14 vehicles stayed. The first was a blue minivan with a woman named Greta Langley and her teenage son Nate, who was 15, and her elderly father, who was 91 years old, and could not, in any practical sense, make a long highway drive without medical support that we could not provide. Greta was a nurse, which was immediately the most valuable information I'd heard in 2 days. She was 43, practical, tired in a way that predated the current crisis, and she looked around the gas station with a professional eye and said, "This isn't bad, for what it is." The second was a semi-truck, an actual 18-wheeler, hauling what turned out to be a mixed load of dry goods, packaged food, cleaning supplies, paper products that the driver, a man named Ron Wickfield, had been moving when everything fell apart and had been driving around with for 2 days while trying to figure out what to do with it. Ron was 58, wore the same flannel shirt for all the days I knew him, and spoke in the careful, measured way of someone who'd spent decades navigating logistics. He looked at the gas station, looked at what we had, and said, "You want this load or not?" I looked at him. "What are you asking for it?" "Fuel for my truck and somewhere to park that isn't the side of the road," he said. "I've been sleeping in the cab. My back is not happy about it." We had a deal. We backed the truck into the staging area behind the station and unloaded it into the prefab shed, which was not nearly big enough to hold everything, so we stacked what didn't fit under tarps with weights on the corners. The dry goods included 48 cases of canned goods, 24 cases of various packaged pasta and rice, a pallet of bottled water, 2 boxes of cereal, and enough paper towels to get us through any future scenario in which paper towels were the primary concern. The cleaning supplies alone were worth their weight in what I can only describe as psychological stability. The second day was also when the group dynamic started to matter in ways it hadn't before. With Greta, Nate, Greta's father, whose name was Harold and who seemed genuinely unclear on where he was or what was happening, which was in some ways a blessing, and Ron added to Gary, Diane, Patty, Kyle, and me. We were 10 people. 11 if you count Harold, who was present but operating in a different plane of reality. 10 people in a 600-square-foot store was not sustainable. Even with the maintenance bay available, it was tight. Tensions weren't high, not yet, but you could feel them forming, the way you feel a headache before it's actually a headache. People were being careful and polite and cooperative, but careful and polite and cooperative takes effort, and effort drains away over time. I handled this by doing something I'd watched managers do at the tire shop, something I'd noticed worked, even when I didn't understand why at the time. I gave everyone a job, not assigned arbitrarily, but matched to what they were already doing well. Gary, security and perimeter. Diane, food and inventory. Patty, records and communications, tracking radio and phone updates. Greta, medical. Kyle, vehicles. Nate, I made him Gary's assistant on perimeter checks, which gave him something to do and put him with someone steady. Ron, supply management for the shed inventory. And me, I took fuel. The pumps, the tanks, the records of what went out, what we could expect to last, the logistics of the resource that made everything else possible. Having jobs helped. It was a small thing and a large thing at the same time. That Friday, Greta's nursing assessment of the situation revealed something I hadn't been thinking about clearly. She pulled me aside at one point and said, "Bites." I looked at her. "Everyone who comes in," she said. "I want to check for bites before they come inside." I know that sounds... "No," I said. "That's right. How do we do it without making it a confrontation?" She thought about it. "We make it a procedure. Everyone who stops gets a health check. That's what we tell them. We're not singling anyone out. It's just what we do." We implemented it immediately. Every vehicle that came in, Greta or I would ask the people to show their arms and neck before they came fully into the staging area. Nobody objected, not once, because everyone who arrived was scared of the same thing, and they all knew it made sense. Nobody who stopped showed a bite. Not in the first 2 days. We were lucky in that. Or we were unlucky in not knowing what we would have done if someone had. On Friday afternoon, I did something that I hadn't planned but that shaped everything that followed. I drove the van alone, 2 miles toward town, to the farm supply store. I didn't tell anyone I was going. I told Diane I was checking something on the road and I'd be back in 20 minutes. This was not the whole truth. The farm supply store was called Kellerman's, and it had a large parking lot and a loading dock in the back. The front windows were intact. The door was locked, which I resolved with a brick I found in the parking lot. I'm not proud of this in the abstract, but I also don't lose any sleep over it in context. What I was looking for, and what I found: generator units. Kellerman's sold generators, the portable kind, and they had 4 left on the floor. I couldn't take all 4 in the van, but I took 2, along with a length of heavy electrical cable, a box of various connectors and adapters, a set of manual hand pumps for water transfer, and this was the find I hadn't expected: a 50-gallon water storage tank, the collapsible kind used for agricultural water storage. It was in a box, and it was heavy and awkward, but I got it in the van. I also grabbed every bottle of water purification tablets on the shelf, 2 boxes of waterproof matches, 3 headlamp flashlights with extra batteries, a roll of heavy-duty chain with a padlock, and a box of heavy fence staples that I had an idea about. The store was completely silent. I moved through it as quietly as I could, loading the van item by item, listening for anything from outside. On my way back through the farm supply aisles, I almost walked past something and then stopped. Went back. On a low shelf near the back, 2 bottles of broad-spectrum animal antibiotics. Not the same as human antibiotics, but Greta would know what they were. Close enough to matter in a world where the actual hospital was no longer an option. I grabbed them. The drive back was clear. 15 minutes total, there and back. Gary was waiting for me when I pulled into the staging area. He didn't look angry, just steady. "I told you to tell me when you go out," he said. "I know, I should have." "Yes," he said. He looked at what was in the van. "Generators are good, I know." He helped me unload without saying anything else about it. That was Gary. Greta saw the antibiotics and pressed her lips together in a particular way that meant she was being careful about how pleased she looked. "Enrofloxacin," she said, looking at the label. "Broad spectrum." She paused. "We won't use these unless we have to." "Understood," I said. "But I'm very glad you got them." "I know," I said. We got the first generator running that evening, connected it to the store's circuit through the external panel in the maintenance bay, which I knew where to find because I'd helped an electrician with a job here once during a power outage drill. It wasn't a perfect connection, but it worked. It kept the cooler units and 1 interior circuit running, which meant cold storage for the food that needed it, and some lighting without draining the main building systems. The second generator I kept as backup, the chain and padlock. I used these on the maintenance bay roll-up door. We'd been leaving it locked from the inside, but a padlocked exterior hasp was better. The fence staples. This was the idea I'd had. The access road in from the county road was about a 1/4 mile of unpaved track through a scrubby tree line. If something came down that access road at night, I wouldn't necessarily see it until it was close. I didn't have wire to fence the road, but I had chain, and I had fence staples. And I spent an hour that evening stringing the chain between 2 trees at about shin height across the access road, about 60 yards from the staging area. Not a serious barrier, but a trip hazard. Something that would slow a person down, and that anything walking without looking where it was going would interact with in a way that might make noise and alert us. Gary watched me do this. "Any port in a storm," he said. "Any port," I agreed. Saturday morning brought the first real crisis. I want to tell you about Saturday carefully because it's when I understood that what was happening out there on Route 9 was not going to organize itself in a survivable direction without someone making very specific decisions. At 6:15 a.m., an hour after Gary and Kyle had done the first perimeter check of the day, a vehicle came down the access road from the county road, not from Route 9, from the back, which meant they knew about the county road access, which we hadn't put on any sign. It was a pickup truck, dark green, and it stopped about 40 yards from the staging area. Just stopped there, and the lights went off, and nobody got out. Gary was on perimeter. He came and got me immediately. I stood in the maintenance bay door and looked at the truck. It sat there, engine off, nobody moving inside, as far as I could see. "What do you want to do?" Gary said. "Give me a minute," I said. I thought about it. The chain across the road, they must have seen it and stopped before it, or driven over it. since it wasn't high enough to stop a truck. Either way, they knew someone had put it there, and they'd stopped. They're not rushing us, I said. No, Gary said. That's either patience or caution, or both. I picked up the flashlight. In the early morning gray, it was barely necessary, but I held it like a prop, something to do with my hands, something to point. I'm going to walk out and talk to them, I said. Gary looked at me. You're on the door with the rifle, I said. Visible. Don't hide it. He positioned himself in the maintenance bay doorway, with the rifle held across his body, not pointed at anything, just present. I walked out across the staging area. My heart was doing something that I don't have a clinical name for, a kind of stutter and surge that I'd learned over the past 2 days to breathe around. I stopped about 15 feet from the truck. Morning, I said. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the driver's window rolled down and a man said, Morning. He was maybe 45, dark beard, gray in it. He was not holding anything visible. You came in the back way, I said. We saw your sign out front, but we weren't sure about pulling up to the roadside, he said. We've had some trouble with groups on main roads. How many of you? I said. 3 in the truck. And we have 2 more in a vehicle back on the county road. What kind of trouble? Yesterday, on Route 11 North, a group tried to stop us, block the road with cars. When we didn't stop, he paused. We got through, but we had to make choices I'd rather not have made. I understood what that meant without requiring him to be specific. What do you need? I said. Fuel. Whatever you can give us. We have things to trade. And, he hesitated. One of us needs a medical assessment. Nothing bite-related, he added, quickly. But one of our people took a hard fall 2 days ago and we're worried about internal injury. I looked at the truck. Pull forward to the staging area. All vehicles. Nobody gets out until I've introduced you to our people. His name was Stephen Garnett, and the others in his truck were his teenage daughter Becca, who was 17 and had a specific expression that meant she'd been through a lot and was processing it through anger because anger was more comfortable than the alternative, and a man named Pete who was Stephen's co-worker from a civil engineering firm and who had apparently been at a work lunch with Stephen when everything started and who had not spoken to his family since. The 2 people in the vehicle on the county road they pulled up when Stephen called them on a walkie-talkie, which was the first walkie-talkie I'd seen and which I immediately noted we needed more of, were a woman named Claire Hodges, mid-30s, and a man of about 60 whose name was Al, and Al was the one who needed the medical check. He'd fallen down a full flight of stairs in a parking garage 2 days ago while running from something, and he'd been wincing every time he breathed for the past 30 hours. Greta examined Al. She did it carefully, systematically, asking him about the pain, where exactly, when it started, what made it worse. She pressed his abdomen in several places while watching his face. She listened to his breathing. Cracked ribs, probably 2, she said. I don't think there's a punctured lung. Your breathing sounds okay. But you need rest, and you need to not be doing anything physically demanding for the next several weeks. Al laughed, which made him wince. Okay, he said. Sounds good. I'm not joking, Greta said. I know, he said. I know you're not. Stephen's group had things we didn't. 3 walkie-talkies. He gave us one immediately, before any trade negotiation, which told me a lot about who he was. They had a hand-crank emergency radio that could pick up more frequencies than our plug-in model. They had a decent first aid kit that Greta absorbed into our medical supplies. And Stephen, as a civil engineer, knew things about water pressure and waste systems and structural loads that were going to be relevant. They also had a map. Not a road atlas, a printed survey map of the county, the kind with actual property lines and elevation markers. Stephen had grabbed it from his office, which was on the 2nd floor of a building in town, which he'd accessed and exited in what sounded like a genuinely harrowing experience involving a fire escape and a lot of movement through a building that was not fully safe. How'd you get out of town? I asked. Service roads, mostly. There's a water treatment access road on the west side that runs parallel to Route 9 for about 2 miles before it connects to the county road network. We used that. I thought about this. How was the town when you came through? He looked at me steadily. Dylan is not recoverable in the short term, he said. I don't know what's happening with the infected population in the long term, but in the short term, the population that was there is not the population that's there now. Nobody said anything for a moment. "How many survivors do you think are still in town?" I said. "Hiding, maybe. There were lights in some windows. I saw a few people, actual people at a distance. But the streets..." He shook his head. "The street-level situation is bad. The church on the south side," Patty said. She'd been listening from the maintenance bay doorway. Stephen looked at her. "I don't know about that specifically. Someone I know was there Thursday night. 11 people. I can't tell you if they're still there," he said, quietly. Patty held still for a second. Then she nodded and went back inside. Saturday continued to pile things on. By noon, we had 17 people in and around the gas station. Not all of them staying. Most of the vehicles that came in that day were, like the earlier ones, passing through. But 6 new people were staying. Stephen's group of 5 plus a woman named Janet Fowler, who arrived alone in an old Jeep with a broken collarbone that she'd been driving around with for 2 days because she hadn't had anywhere to go for Greta to look at it. Janet turned out to be a high school biology teacher, which wasn't immediately a survival-relevant skill, but she was organized, and she was calm, and she was what you might describe as allergic to self-pity, which was its own kind of useful. We had, by Saturday evening, Gary, Diane, Patty, Kyle, me, Greta, Nate, Harold, Ron, Stephen, Becca, Pete, Claire, Al, Janet, 15, plus Harold in his own reality, plus Ron's semi, which was still parked in back, plus Rusty and Colonel in Gary's truck, who had by now been allowed out and were doing the important work of wandering the perimeter and barking at things in the dark occasionally, which served as a better early warning system than the chain across the access road. The staging area, by Saturday evening, looked like a very specific kind of organized chaos. Vehicles parked in a rough circle facing outward. The shed full. Supplies organized under tarps. The generator running. One light string I'd found in the maintenance bay, Christmas lights, of all things, left by some previous employee strung up inside the store. It looked, in the strange way that circumstances can create aesthetics you'd never choose intentionally, like a camp, like something that was going to have to do. I made a decision Saturday night that I still think was right, even though the immediate aftermath was uncomfortable. I told everyone we needed to plan to move. Not immediately, not until we had better information about the route north and about what was actually at the interstate staging area. But that this location, with its glass windows and flat topography and location right on a well-traveled road, was not somewhere we could defend indefinitely. We had fuel, which was the reason to stay as long as we did, but fuel alone wasn't enough. "The plan," I said, to everyone assembled in the store or standing at the door of it, for those who couldn't fit inside, is to use this location as what it is. A fuel and supply depot. We help people passing through. We gather information. We make a map of what's out there and what route north is safest. And when we have that information, we move. What if the military staging area doesn't exist? This was Pete. He'd been quiet for most of the 2 days, but when he spoke, it was usually to ask the question nobody else wanted to ask directly. Then we find the farthest defensible point north on the interstate corridor that has supply access, I said. There are rest stops, distribution centers, a regional hospital on the highway about 60 miles north. We find what's viable, and we make that work. "This is viable," Pete said. "For now," I said. "But think about what we did today. We had 17 people here at one point. Most of them moved on, but the ones who are running out of road, who don't have a destination, are going to start stopping here and not leaving. And we can't support an unlimited population at a gas station." This was true, and everyone could see it was true, even if they didn't love it. "When?" Gary said. "I want 2 more days," I said. 2 more days of gathering information from people coming through. I want a clearer picture of what's on Route 9 between here and the interstate. And I want to know what's actually at that staging area before we drive 20 miles with 15 people. He nodded. 2 days, he said. Sunday was when the weird stuff started. I don't have a better framework for it than that, the weird stuff. I'll tell you what I observed and let you make your own interpretation. At around 2 a.m. Sunday morning, the dogs started going. Not their normal bark, they did that occasionally when something moved in the fields, usually raccoons or deer. This was different, both of them at the same time. barking in a way that meant something they recognized as wrong. Gary was on watch. He came and got me. The dogs were facing east, toward the soybean fields, not toward the road, not toward the access road. East, where there was nothing, just flat, dark fields, and, about 3 miles out, a line of woods. I looked east with Gary's binoculars, which didn't help much in the dark. I couldn't see anything. The dogs settled after maybe 2 minutes, then started up again at around 4 a.m. Same direction, same quality of alarm. In the morning light, I walked out to the eastern edge of the property, just to look. The field there was flat and dry, and there were no footprints in the immediate area. But about 30 yards out, in the lower section where the ground was softer near an irrigation ditch, there were marks in the dirt. A lot of them. Not clear footprints, exactly more like the marks you'd get if a group of people had walked through soft ground without lifting their feet properly. Drag marks, almost, moving from south to north, parallel to the road. There were a lot of marks, more than I could easily count. I went back inside and told Gary. He came and looked. They passed through the field, he said. Yeah. Moving north. Yeah. We didn't hear them, he said. Except the dogs. They're quiet, I said. Which was the thing that bothered me most about it. Individually, the infected ones made noise. You could hear them moan and hit things. But in a group, moving through an open field in the dark, they'd apparently moved without enough sound to wake anyone but the dogs, which meant they weren't randomly flailing toward noise. They were moving in a direction. Where north? Gary said. I don't know, I said. If they follow the land, I thought about it. There's a ridge, about 4 miles north, runs east-west. They'd either stop at it or follow it to the road. 4 miles north is the Route 9 and County 7 junction, Gary said. He knew the area better than I did. There's a cluster of buildings there, old grain elevator, a few houses, someone living there. Hard to say. We noted it and moved on, because we had 17, now 18. A couple had arrived at 6 a.m. with 2 kids, people to keep operational, and we couldn't spend the morning staring at field marks. But I thought about it. A group of them, moving north through the fields at night, not toward us, around us, or past us, moving with some kind of collective direction, even without any capacity for coordination. That was the thing that wasn't quite animal and wasn't quite what you expected. Sunday brought 72 vehicle visits to the station. 72. Word had gotten out somehow, probably from people we'd already helped, who'd talked to other people on the road. By 10 a.m., the access road from the county side had a line of 4 vehicles waiting. I made Kyle the traffic manager. He stood at the staging area and directed vehicles, managing wait times, making sure nobody piled up on the access road where we couldn't see them. We implemented a strict process. Every vehicle, health check from Greta or from Janet, who Greta trained over the course of that morning, fuel assessment, trade or supply arrangement if possible, information exchange, and departure. No vehicle stayed more than 30 minutes unless they had a clear reason to be added to our group. We turned away 7 vehicles, though that's not quite the right way to describe it. We refused to give fuel or supplies to 7 groups because of what we'd learned in the intake conversations. 2 of them had weapons displayed aggressively on approach. 3 had members who refused the health check, which, practically speaking, was not a good sign. 1 had a man who made a specific kind of remark about the women in our group, which Gary addressed in a way that I won't describe in detail, but that was efficient and unambiguous. 1 group of teenagers arrived, demanding supplies, and became aggressive when I explained the trade system. They eventually left when they realized we weren't going to fold. None of these things escalated to violence. I think the combination of Gary with his rifle, the professional organization of the staging area, and the simple fact that we were providing an obviously useful service worked as deterrence. You don't burn down the hospital when you might need the hospital. 1 vehicle on Sunday changed everything. It was a white box truck, the kind used for restaurant food delivery, with the logo of a local grocery distributor on the side. It pulled in around 1 in the afternoon, driven by a man named Carl Whitfield, 56, who had driven it from the distributor's warehouse, about 12 miles south. Carl had been at the warehouse when the outbreak started and had spent 2 days locked inside it with 4 other warehouse workers. 2 of those workers were now dead, not from bites, but from a confrontation with a group that had tried to force entry on Friday night. The remaining 2 were in the truck with Carl. Ando, a 24-year-old warehouse worker who hadn't said more than 10 words in the past 2 days, and Petra, 51, the warehouse manager, who had a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being responsible for other people in a crisis. What Carl had in his truck, the remaining contents of a regional grocery distribution warehouse, or a portion of them, not the whole warehouse. Most of it was still there, 12 miles south. But what he'd loaded before they'd had to run, 48 pallets of mixed dry goods, reduced to maybe 12 pallets after 2 days of helping people who came to the warehouse before things went wrong. Still, 12 pallets of mixed dry goods is a staggering amount of food. Canned goods, packaged goods, dry goods, some snack items, all sealed, all shelf-stable. I stood and looked at the truck's interior for a full minute without saying anything. Carl said, "I figured if anyone was organized enough to have a sign up, they were organized enough to use this. Can you take us to the warehouse?" I said. He looked at me. "That's why I came here. I can't do it alone. And the truck's almost empty." "How far?" 12 miles south and east. Back roads. I know the route. The main roads are not good." "How is the warehouse secured?" "Loading bay doors. Steel roll-ups, locked from the inside. We had them locked before we left. I have the keys." I thought about the 12 miles. I thought about what was on the roads. Then I thought about 12 pallets of food becoming however many were still in the warehouse. Even partial, even with some damaged or compromised, a grocery distribution warehouse was something different from what we had. It was the kind of resource that changed the time horizon entirely. "Tomorrow morning," I said. "First light. You, me, and Gary. We take the truck south. We load what we can. We come back." Carl nodded. Petra, from behind him, said, "What is this place?" I looked around at the staging area, at the vehicles parked in a ring, at the Christmas lights visible through the maintenance bay door, at Gary's dogs circling the perimeter, at Nate checking in the arriving cars while Janet talked to a family near the shed. "It's a gas station," I said. She looked at me like that wasn't the answer to the question she'd asked. "It's what we've got," I said. Sunday evening, Stephen came to find me. He'd been working with the survey map all day, talking to people as they came through, building a picture of what was on the roads between us and the interstate. He spread the map on the counter inside. "Okay," he said. "The interstate entrance is 23 miles north. Route 9 is passable for most of that distance, based on reports from the people I've talked to today. There are 2 problem points." He pointed to the map. "Here, at mile 12 there's a bottleneck where Route 9 narrows to 2 lanes through the Garner Creek Bridge. Multiple people mentioned abandoned vehicles on and near the bridge. They've been getting through, but it's slow. We can clear vehicles if we need to," I said. "Maybe. Depends on what's in them." He moved his finger. "And here, at the junction with County 7, about 17 miles out. This one is less clear. About half the people I talked to had no trouble there. The other half went around it, using the rural route. The ones who went around said there was a crowd of infected on the county road near the junction." "Crowd? How many?" "Estimates vary. 20 to 100. That's a wide range. People are not at their most accurate when they're terrified," he said. "But even 20 is something we'd have to deal with if we're moving a convoy." "What about the staging area? The military thing?" He put his finger on a point past the interstate junction. 3 separate people mentioned it. All 3 said it was north of the interchange, about 2 miles. A National Guard logistics unit with a temporary command post. One person, a guy who came through about 4 this afternoon, had actually been there 2 days ago and left. He paused. "Left why?" I said. He said it was chaotic. People arriving faster than they could process them. Limited food and water. National Guard was trying to organize something, but it was, he referenced his own notes, quote, "more of a parking lot with guns than an actual safe zone. But it exists. It existed 48 hours ago. Whether it's still there." "It's a direction," I said. "It's a direction," he agreed. I looked at the map for a long time. 23 miles. 2 potential problem points. 1 uncertain destination. 12 pallets of food in a warehouse 12 miles south. I had a lot of decisions to make and not a lot of time to be comfortable with them. Monday morning, I drove south with Carl and Gary in the grocery truck. I want to tell you about that drive south, because it was different from everything that had come before. The 2 runs I'd done previously, the Dollar General, the farm supply, had been 4 miles at most, fast, daylight. Close enough that the station was visible from the road if something went wrong. 12 miles south and east was different. It was into the kind of territory we'd been avoiding. The route Carl knew kept us off Route 9 for most of the way, using agricultural service roads and 2 county roads I'd never been on. The first 6 miles were fine open fields, nothing on the roads, quiet in a way that felt almost rural normal. Then Carl said coming up to the industrial area, and we went through about 2 miles of warehouse districts and light manufacturing, and that was where we saw the scale of it. I'm not going to describe everything we saw. Some of it I don't want to revisit in too much detail, but I want to give you the honest picture, because this is not a story where I'm going to pretend the horror wasn't there. There were groups of them in the industrial area, not huge mobs scattered, individual and small clusters. They reacted to the truck's engine noise, turning toward it, walking toward the road as we passed. But we were moving fast enough, and they were far enough from the road that none of them reached us. I kept my eyes forward. Gary watched the sides. Carl drove with a particular focused calm that came from having done this route already. What struck me wasn't the infected people themselves. It was the evidence of what had happened in the first hours before the survival instinct kicked in for the people who were going to survive. Broken glass, cars in the middle of roads, doors open, as if the people in them had simply gotten out and walked away from everything. One building with every window on the first floor broken, but the upper floors intact. A child's shoe in the middle of an intersection. I don't let myself think about that shoe for very long. The warehouse was on a service road about a half mile from the last county road. Carl had been right. The loading bay doors were steel and locked and intact. We checked the perimeter before opening anything. The area behind the warehouse was clear. The service road was clear. We unlocked the bay, rolled it up, and went in. I had a moment, standing in the loading area of that warehouse, that was almost embarrassing in how it felt. I don't know what word to use exactly. Overwhelming is too mild. There was just so much food, pallets and pallets of it, most of it untouched. The kind of stock that feeds a region's worth of stores. And it was just sitting here, in the dark and the cool, still organized on its pallets, like nothing had happened. Carl had rigged the truck's liftgate while Gary and I loaded. We worked fast and without much conversation. We didn't have to make decisions about what to take. We took the dense, shelf-stable items that could be carried efficiently. Canned goods by the case, dry pasta and rice by the pallet, cooking oil, coffee, Gary insisted on coffee, which I respected, sugar and salt and flour, which Diane had specifically asked me to get if I could, cases of bottled water even though we had some, because water is water. We filled the truck to the bay line. Carl said he could make another run with a different truck from the warehouse fleet. There were 4 vehicles there, a mix of box trucks and vans. We'll do another run, I said. Tomorrow. Maybe 2 vehicles. I know where the fleet keys are, Carl said. We locked the warehouse back up. I want to note that we locked it. I thought about it briefly and then did it. Not because I had any claim to the warehouse or what was in it, but because if we locked it, there was a chance it would still be there tomorrow. And because leaving it open felt like giving up on the idea that tomorrow was worth planning for. The drive back was harder, oddly, than the drive out. We were heavier and slower, and I was more anxious, because now we had something worth protecting. We got back to the station at 10:30 a.m. The amount of food that came out of that truck transformed what we were capable of. I'm going to skip forward now, because there are things I need to tell you about in the day-by-day accounting, while true, starts to feel repetitive in a way that doesn't capture what it was actually like. What it was actually like was 2 steps forward, 1 step that surprised you, 1 step you almost fell off completely. Repeat. By the end of our first week at the station, we had established a functional operation. 22 people calling the station home base, with varying levels of commitment to staying long-term versus moving on. 3 warehouse runs completed. Carl knew that building and those vehicles and that route better than anyone, and each run filled our stores significantly. The prefab shed was full. We'd set up a secondary storage point in the back of Ron's semi, since he'd made clear he wasn't leaving without his truck, and the truck wasn't leaving without a good reason. The fuel situation. We'd been dispensing fuel to passing survivors all week. Our estimate at the start of the week had been 8,000 gallons regular and 4,000 diesel. By day 7, we were at approximately 6,000 regular and 3,500 diesel. We'd helped an estimated 260 vehicles during the week. That's not a number I made up. Patty kept records. 260 vehicles. Most of them families. Most of them heading north. I thought about those 260 vehicles sometimes, late at night when everything was quiet, where they were, whether the staging area had held together long enough to receive them, whether they'd gotten there. The incidents during that first week, in compressed form. Day 4, one of the infected found its way into the staging area during the night, through a gap in the vehicle ring that we hadn't accounted for. It was the first time we'd had one in the perimeter. Gary's dogs reacted immediately. Gary put it down with one shot. We closed the gap and felt bad about the shot because of the noise, but nothing came in response. Day 5. A group of 8 people arrived who had, it became clear over the intake process, been traveling together for 3 days and had a dynamic problem. 2 of the men had been consistently taking supplies from weaker members of their own group and using control of a vehicle as leverage. The most vulnerable members, a woman and her elderly mother, were essentially being held there by circumstance. Greta identified the situation. Stephen talked to the 2 men. Gary stood nearby. The 2 men left. The woman and her mother, whose name was Frances and who was 84 and had sharp eyes and a very dry sense of humor, stayed. Day 6. Pete, who'd been increasingly withdrawn since he arrived, came to me in the evening and said he needed to go south to try to reach his family. He knew it was risky. He knew the town was compromised. He knew I couldn't stop him. I didn't try to stop him. I gave him 10 gallons of fuel, a bag of food, and the walkie-talkie with the longest range. I told him to check in if he found a high spot. I told him to come back if he couldn't get through. He drove away at dawn of day 7. I don't know what happened to him. Day 7. The radio, which Patty had been monitoring constantly and which had been cycling the same emergency broadcast for most of the week, suddenly broadcast something new. A different voice, less polished than the emergency broadcast standard, more urgent and specific. It said there was a forward operating base established at mile marker 41 on Interstate 78 North. It gave coordinates. It said the base had medical support, food distribution, and fuel reserves. It said they were taking survivors. Mile marker 41 on Interstate 78 North. I went and found Stephen and his survey map. 47 miles. 47 miles from our current position to mile marker 41 on Interstate 78 North. That was farther than the staging area people had been talking about, which meant either there were 2 installations, or the smaller one we'd been hearing about had been consolidated into something more organized at the farther point. I gathered everyone. The full group, all 22 of us, or 21. Pete having left that morning. I told them what the broadcast had said. I told them I thought we should plan to move. Nobody objected. Not directly. Frances asked 3 sharp questions about convoy organization that showed she'd been a project manager in her working life. Janet asked about the injured Al with his cracked ribs, who was stable but not mobile ready. Greta said Al could travel in a reclined position in the back of a cargo vehicle. I said, "We leave in 2 days. That gives us 1 more warehouse run, time to pack and organize the vehicles, and time to scout the first 15 miles of Route 9. Scout how? Stephen said. Fast. Kyle and I in the van. No full stops, just to see what the bridge situation looks like and what's at that county road junction. He nodded. The scout run was Tuesday morning. Kyle drove. I navigated. We went light. Just the van, half a tank, 2 bags, the radio. The first 12 miles of Route 9 were manageable. We passed a dozen or so infected individuals on or near the road over that distance. None of them stopped us. We were moving at 50 or 60 miles an hour, and they reacted to the sound by turning toward us, but couldn't reach a moving vehicle. The Garner Creek Bridge at mile 12 had 3 abandoned vehicles on it, 1 in the center lane, 2 more off to the right shoulder. We stopped briefly upstream and I assessed them. They were empty. 2 had keys in the ignition. The third was dead and would need to be pushed. We bring chains, I said, noting it. The county road junction at mile 17 was a different picture. From the rise before the junction, we could see it without getting close. The junction had maybe 30 of them gathered in and around it, near a cluster of buildings on the northeast corner. Some were moving, most were standing. All were oriented vaguely towards something we couldn't see from our vantage point. "What are they looking at?" Kyle said. I looked through the binoculars, took a moment to sort out what I was seeing. There was a man on the roof of one of the buildings at the junction. A small general store, the roof maybe 15 feet up. He was standing on the roof, and he was alive, and he was just standing there, watching the crowd below. The crowd wasn't getting up to him. Not because they were trying and failing, they weren't trying. There was no door or window being beaten on. They were just gathered near the building, like it was a warm spot. "He's been up there a while," I said. "They're not actively after him. They just ended up there. Can we help him?" Kyle said. I thought about it. The junction was 30 infected people in a tight space. The van couldn't plow through 30 people safely. Even if it could, getting close enough for a person on a roof to get into a moving vehicle. "Not right now," I said. "Not without the full convoy. And if the convoy comes through there," I thought about it more. 30 people at a junction we needed to get through. "We need to move them," I said. "Or go around them. Or create a distraction." "How do you move 30? "Noise," I said. "They go toward noise. If we can create noise south of the junction and draw them south, the junction clears long enough for the convoy to pass through." Kyle looked at me. "Like a decoy." "Yeah. What kind of noise?" "Something loud, sustained, on a timer, so we don't have to be there when it goes off." I thought about what we had. I thought about the flares in the gas station supply closet, the road flares. They were loud when they ignited, and they gave off a hissing, continuous sound. Not perfect. A car alarm would be better. A car alarm on a timer. "We have a car at the station that's been sitting since Thursday," I said. "That minivan. Greta's minivan. She'd already transferred to our evacuation plan, planning to ride in the cargo van. The car alarm. If we can rig it to trigger." "I know how to do that," Kyle said. "My friend, we used to mess around with car alarms in parking lots." He saw my expression. "I know, but I can do it." "Okay," I said. "That's the plan." We drove back to the station. On the way, I thought about the man on the roof. We had to get him down. Tuesday afternoon was warehouse run number 4. Carl, Claire, and Ando in 2 vehicles. They came back with what Carl estimated was the last practical load. The warehouse still had product, but the denser, more useful items were largely cleared. What remained was an awkward packaging or perishable adjacent, not suitable for what we were doing. Carl had also checked on something else while he was there. The warehouse had a set of old county road maps in the manager's office paper, laminated, the kind that predated GPS. He brought 3 of them back. Between those and Stephen's survey map, we now had a reasonably complete picture of what was between us and mile marker 41. The picture was not comfortable, but it was manageable. Tuesday evening, we had a convoy planning meeting that lasted about 2 hours. Vehicles: Gary's truck. Gary, Diane, Rusty, Colonel. Ron's semi-truck. Ron, Carl, Ando, because Carl knew trucks. The grocery cargo van, Stephen, Becca, Francis, Al on a foam pad in back. Greta's minivan repurposed as decoy. So Greta now in the second van. Greta, Nate, Harold, Janet, Dennis's white Econoline, me, Kyle, Patty, Claire, Petra, and the Jeep, Janet's Jeep, driven by Janet. "Wait, I just put her in the van. Let me sort this." The Jeep, driven by Petra, and the dark blue pickup that had arrived with the Holton family, which the Holtons had left us when they continued north on their own, that pickup driven by Stephen. The convoy order. Gary's truck first, because it was the most maneuverable, and Gary was the most experienced at threat assessment. Then my van. Then Greta's van. Then Ron's semi. Then the grocery van, Stephen. Then the pickup, Petra, with walkie-talkies in the lead vehicle, and the last vehicle to maintain communication. The decoy plan for the county road junction. Kyle and I would pre-position Greta's minivan on the south side of the junction the evening before departure. Kyle would rig the car alarm on a timer 4 hours after triggering, which would mean it fired at roughly 7 a.m. if we triggered it at 3 a.m. the night before. The convoy would approach the junction at approximately 7:15, by which time the alarm would have been going for 15 minutes and hopefully drawn the infected population south. The bridge clearance. We'd go first with Gary's truck and chains, pull the cars off the bridge before the convoy crossed. Mile marker 41. Unknown until we got there, but that was where we were going. I went to find Patty at one point during the planning session and said, "You don't have to come." She looked at me. "I mean, you know this area. You know people here. If you want to stay or go back and look for..." "Don't," she said. "Okay," I said. She looked out the window. "My sister is gone," she said. "I know she is. I've known since Thursday night." She paused. "There's nothing here for me now, so I'm going." I nodded. Wednesday, departure day, -1. I was up before everyone else, 4 a.m. I made coffee. I sat behind the counter in the store with my hands around a coffee cup, and I looked at the place. I've described it already: the cardboard on the windows, the plywood lower panels, the inventory Patty and Diane had maintained so carefully on a yellow legal pad, the supply closet, the back room with the security monitor that had basically become my second home, the bathroom where someone had taped up a schedule for use times because 15 people and one bathroom required coordination, the Christmas lights strung in a loop from the lighting fixtures, the counter where Gary had first leaned the rifle that first night. It had been 8 days. 8 days since the flickering light above pump 3, and the emergency broadcast on the radio, and the woman in one shoe. It didn't feel like 8 days. It felt much shorter and much longer simultaneously, which is a thing I've heard people say about intense experiences, and which I now understand firsthand. The gas station had done what it was supposed to do. It had been a place to stop. It had been a place to help people. It had been what the sign at the entrance said it was. And if the sign didn't say those words exactly, that was what it meant. I finished my coffee. I went and checked the security monitor. All clear. I got out a new piece of receipt paper and wrote down the fuel levels. Regular, 4,300 gallons remaining. Diesel, 2,900 gallons. I thought about leaving a note. Something for whoever came next, if anyone came next. This place was capable of helping people for another month at least, on fuel alone. If someone came who needed it, they should know what they had. I wrote a note. On the back of a cardboard box, in black marker, large enough to be read from a distance. I put it on the counter, visible from the door. It said, "Fuel available. Tanks fullish. Store-stocked look in back shed. Health check everyone who comes in. Good luck." I thought about signing it. I didn't sign it. Wednesday was packing and preparation. We loaded the convoy vehicles with the supplies we'd allocated, not everything, because Ron's truck couldn't carry everything, and we'd made a deliberate choice to leave a portion of the warehouse food in the shed for whoever came next. We packed the vehicles systematically. Heavier items on the bottom, medical supplies accessible in the lead, and last vehicles, water distributed throughout. Each vehicle had a full tank from our pumps. At 3 a.m. Wednesday night, Kyle and I drove Greta's minivan to the county road junction. Kyle had rigged the car alarm the previous afternoon, and it worked exactly as he said it would. A timer mechanism connected to the alarm trigger, set for 4 hours from activation. Driving to the junction at 3 a.m. was not comfortable. The road was dark and empty, and our headlights felt exposed. We went slowly, without talking, and the fields on either side were thick with a dark I couldn't see through, even with binoculars. The junction, at 3 a.m., still had the infected population. In the dark, with no lights other than our headlights, they were visible only as movement dark shapes turning toward our headlights, walking toward the sound. There were fewer than the 20 or 30 we'd seen in daylight. Some of them had moved on or dispersed, or more of them had arrived. I couldn't tell. Maybe 15. We stopped 400 yards from the junction and killed the lights in the engine. Waited. After a minute, the shapes at the junction stopped moving toward where we'd been. They went still. A few resumed their slow, directionless movement. "How do we get the van in position without them?" Kyle started. "We drive past the junction at speed. I said. Don't stop. Run it down the road about 100 yards south. Jump out, set the timer, and run. Run, he said. I'll bring the van back slow from a different road. There's a crossover about half a mile east. He looked at me. That's a pretty rough plan. It's the plan, I said. We did it exactly that way. I drove past the junction, fast, headlights on. Horn hit once to draw them south as we passed. Kyle jumped out on the south side, triggered the timer, and I kept driving. The van's engine fading behind him, Kyle ran north in the dark, off-road, through a soybean stubble field, while I looped east on the crossover road and came back from the north to pick him up. It took 11 minutes, most of which I spent not thinking about what might be in the field that Kyle was running through in the dark. He was at the crossover when I got there, breathing hard, scratched from the stubble, entirely uninjured. Timer's set, he said, getting in. Good. We drove back to the station. I slept for 2 hours. It was the first time I'd slept more than an hour at a stretch in 8 days, which probably tells you something about the state of my nervous system. 4:30 a.m., convoy departure day. I was up, and so was everyone else, because we'd all agreed on an early start. We needed to be through the junction by 8 at the latest, while the decoy was still going. We had breakfast, which Diane and Greta had prepared over the camp stove oatmeal, because it was practical, with some canned peaches mixed in, which tasted extraordinary in a way that was entirely about context. Harold ate all his oatmeal and asked if we were going camping. Nate told him yes, we were going camping, and Harold seemed genuinely pleased about this. Gary loaded the dogs into his truck. They were excited, which was either good energy or a bad omen, depending on how you felt about dogs. At 5 a.m., I stood at the entrance of the gas station on Route 9 and looked south toward Dillon, which was 8 days and a completely different life away. And then I looked north toward whatever was 47 miles up the road. Kyle pulled the van around. Convoy forming up in the staging area, engines starting. I went and took the sign from the entrance post, the fuel available sign. I looked at it for a second. Then I put it back. Whoever came next would need to know. I got in the van. The convoy pulled out at 5:12 a.m., Gary's truck first, onto Route 9 heading north. I was second, my van. And when I made the turn north and the gas station disappeared from my rearview mirror, I didn't let myself look back more than once. Once was enough. The first 12 miles went the way we'd planned. Open road, thin traffic of infected individuals on the roadsides, none of them able to stop a moving convoy. Gary spotted one cluster of maybe 10 of them at an intersection around mile 8, slowed, and then went around them, onto the shoulder. The semi behind us had a moment Ron had to maneuver carefully around the shoulder section, but made it. The bridge at mile 12, Gary stopped before it. He and I got out, walked the bridge on foot. The 3 abandoned vehicles were exactly where we'd seen them. The first 2 were empty. The third had someone in it, still, in the driver's seat, and we had a quiet moment of confirmation before Gary got in the second car, started it with the keys in the ignition, and moved it to the shoulder. He moved the first one the same way. The third we couldn't start dead battery, but it was lighter than I expected, and Gary hooked a tow chain to it, and the truck pulled it clear in about 4 minutes. The convoy crossed the bridge. Ron's semi crossed the bridge, and I held my breath for the entire time the weight was on it. But the bridge was fine. It was a concrete bridge, and it wasn't going anywhere. At mile 17, we heard Greta's car alarm going. From a quarter mile south, it was audible, that flat, persistent, electronic wail. We couldn't see the junction yet, but on the walkie-talkie Gary said, "Junction visible. Count maybe 5 still at the corner. Rest have moved south. Proceeding." 5. That was manageable. The 5 were spread across the intersection. Gary went through without stopping, easing around 2 of them who were in the road, and I followed, and the convoy came through in less than 2 minutes. Each vehicle threading through at a speed that meant the infected present had no real chance of catching us. They turned toward each vehicle as it passed, reached out, didn't follow. The man on the roof of the general store was not there anymore. I looked up as I drove through. Empty roofline. He'd gotten down, or he'd gotten down and something had happened when he'd gotten down. There was no way to know. I thought about him for the next 10 miles. Miles 17 to 47. This is where I need to tell you about the detour. At mile 22, something happened to the road that wasn't on any of our maps. because it had probably happened in the past week. A section of Route 9 had been effectively blocked, not by people, but by a propane tanker that had jackknifed across the road and a surrounding cluster of vehicles that had piled up behind it over the previous days. The jam extended about a quarter mile, and there was no getting through it at convoy scale. Stephen, in the lead position by the time we reached this stretch, we'd reorganized after the bridge, putting him and his survey map second behind Gary, consulted the map. There was a rural route running parallel east, connecting back to Route 9 at mile 27. The rural route was unpaved for 2 miles of it. Not impossible, but slow. Ron was worried about the semi on unpaved road, and rightfully the shoulders were soft, and if the truck went off-road at all, it would get stuck. We went slowly. Ron drove in the center of the track, barely a truck width in places. It took 40 minutes to do those 2 miles. Nobody spoke on the walkies except necessary updates. The trees pressed close on either side. The dogs in Gary's truck were quiet. At one point on that rural route, we came around a curve, and there was a house set back from the road, a small white farmhouse, and there were lights on inside. Actual lights, not a fire electric light, from a generator or from somehow still functioning power. Someone was inside. Gary stopped. I stopped behind him. On the walkie, he said, "See that?" "Yeah," I said. "We stop or keep moving?" I thought about it. The convoy stopped behind us. 17 people and Ron's semi, and all of it sitting on a narrow rural road in the trees. "We can't stop," I said. "Not here. Not with the whole convoy on this road." Gary was quiet. "If there's someone in there," I said, "they've made it a week. They know what they're doing. We can't extract them safely right now without risk to everyone else." Another pause. Then, "Agreed." The convoy started moving again. I looked at the farmhouse in my side mirror as we passed. The curtain in one window moved slightly. Someone was looking out. I've thought about that house a lot. Back on Route 9 at mile 27. 17 more miles. Miles 27 to 40. What I'd call the hardest stretch. Not because of infected numbers, this section of road had fewer visible infected than the southern section, possibly because the population density here was lower to begin with, but because of the roads themselves. Route 9 through this stretch ran through a more developed corridor strip malls, gas stations, no fuel in them. We checked 2 on the way through, and both were dry, chain restaurants, a couple of car dealerships, the kind of American development that looks particularly strange when it's empty. Parking lots full of cars that nobody's coming to pick up, drive-through lanes with cars still in them, doors open. We stopped once, briefly, at a Walgreens, my idea. Greta had been in the middle of a thought about medical supplies we could use, and I'd had the same thought. 5 minutes, Greta, Gary, and me. Quick circuit, through the pharmacy section. The prescription stuff behind the counter we couldn't get to without a key, but the front of store medical section was largely intact, and we grabbed bandages, antiseptic, over-the-counter antibiotics, pain relievers, and the entire stock of allergy medication because Nate, it turned out, had environmental allergies, and we'd been watching his supply dwindle. In and out in 5 minutes. Back on the road. At mile 38, Gary came on the walkie with a note in his voice I hadn't heard before. "I've got something ahead," he said. Slowing down, I came up behind him and slowed with him. Through his windshield, I could see what was on the road. It was a group of survivors, not infected people, walking north on the road shoulder. Maybe 20 of them, adults and children, on foot, carrying whatever they'd managed to carry. Some of them had bags. Some of them had nothing. They were walking with the specific exhaustion of people who'd been walking for a long time. When they saw the convoy, they stopped. A few of them put their hands up, which was such a human gesture, such a specifically scared and hopeful gesture, that something in my chest did something I'll just describe as uncomfortable. Gary stopped the convoy. We got out. The group was from a town 15 miles east, a town I'd never been to, a town I'd never had reason to think about. They'd been walking for 2 days. They had 1 man with a broken arm, 2 children who were dehydrated, and nothing that functioned as food anymore. We couldn't take 20 people on the convoy. Not safely. Not with the loads we had. But we could take the people who couldn't walk. The man with the broken arm, whose name was Devon, and the 2 dehydrated children and their mother, went in the back of Ron's semi, in the space between pallets. The rest of the walking group continued north. We gave them half of our spare water and a bag of food and the coordinates from the radio broadcast mile marker 41, and we drove on. I watched them in the mirror. 20 people, walking north, getting smaller. I drove north, mile 40 to 47. The final stretch, the interstate junction at mile 40. We took the on-ramp north, and the road widened, and the convoy spread out slightly in the additional lane. I'd been on this stretch of interstate hundreds of times. I've driven it in good weather and bad, in the middle of the night, half asleep, running late. I knew every overpass, every rest area marker. The difference now was difficult to describe, except to say that knowing a road and knowing what's on a road are different things. And what was on this road now was not what I expected. Other survivors, vehicles, moving north, more of them than I'd seen since the first day. Not a flood, a steady stream. People who'd been waiting for a clear road, or who'd just made it this far, converging on the same broadcast coordinates. It made the convoy feel less alone. At mile marker 41 north, we saw it. It was larger than what the man who'd visited 2 days ago had described. It had grown. The National Guard presence was visible from half a mile away, a command post with vehicles, lights, a chain-link perimeter that had been erected across the interstate median, and what looked like hundreds of people in tents and vehicles, in a large rest area and parking lot that had been commandeered and expanded with temporary fencing. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't the kind of orderly military installation you see in the movies. It looked like what it was, something put together fast by people working hard in extremely difficult circumstances. But the lights were on. The perimeter was staffed. And when we pulled up to the checkpoint, the National Guard soldier who came to my window looked tired and overworked and entirely real. "How many in your convoy?" he said. 22, I said. "Plus some we picked up on the road. 25 total." He looked at the convoy lined up behind me. He said something into his radio. "You got fuel?" he said. "Our vehicles are full," I said. He looked at me. "You come from Route 9? "Yes. There's a gas station down there. People have been saying it." He was watching me. "That yours?" "Sort of," I said. He held my gaze for a second. Then he nodded and stepped back and waved us through. I drove through the checkpoint. The staging area inside was chaotic and crowded and smelled like generator exhaust and too many people in too small a space. There were medical stations and a food distribution point and a row of portable toilets and a section for vehicles and a section for people who didn't have vehicles. There was a board with handwritten names on it, a massive board, covered in names, and people standing in front of it reading it with expressions I couldn't look at directly. I parked the van. People climbed out. Greta found the medical station immediately and was absorbed into it within 3 minutes because they needed nurses, and she was there. Gary parked the truck and let the dogs out, and they went and did the thing dogs do when they get out of a truck after a long drive. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment after everyone else got out. Patty was the last one out of the van on the passenger side. She stopped at my window. "Come on," she said. I got out. There were things at the staging area that I hadn't expected. Good things and bad things and complicated things. Let me tell you about them in the order they happened. The good thing first, the board with names. I'd seen it from across the staging area and felt something go tight in me at the sight of it. Thinking of the man with his family in Nebraska. Thinking of Pete, who'd driven south to find his family. I went and looked at it. The names were survivors checking in. People who'd arrived and registered so that other people arriving could know they were alive. It was a simple system, and it was, in the context, one of the kindest things I'd seen. I didn't find Pete's name. I did find someone that Patty was looking for. Her sister's name was on the board. Margaret Holbrook. Not her sister from the hospital. Patty had another sister, one she hadn't mentioned, who lived north of Dillon, and Margaret's name was on the board with a note that said, "Arrived, day 6, shelter 7A. Patty found shelter 7A. She found her sister. I was not there for that reunion, but Diane was. And Diane told me later that what happened was not dramatic. That Patty and her sister just held on to each other for a while, without much noise, and that was all. The bad thing, The man who'd originally given us the broadcast information, the one who'd visited the staging area 2 days before us, was right that it was chaotic. The guard unit here had food for approximately 3 days at current consumption rates. They were expecting resupply but hadn't received it. There was a fuel situation. They had a tanker truck, nearly dry, and the medical support was overwhelmed. I talked to the officer in charge, a National Guard captain named Andrea Walsh, who looked like she'd slept 4 hours in the past 4 days, and who got straight to the point. "You have fuel logistics background?" she said. "I managed a gas station," I said. She looked at me for a beat longer than felt comfortable. "The station on Route 9, you said that was yours." "For 8 days," I said. "The tanks," she said. "How much is left in the tanks there?" I thought about what I'd written down before we left. About 4,000 gallons regular, nearly 3,000 diesel. She was quiet for a moment. "That's significant," she said. "Yes," I said. "We have vehicles that can access it," she said. "Tanker trucks. But we'd need a safe route." I thought about the convoy run we'd just done. I thought about the problem points. Route 9 has a bridge at mile 12 that's currently clear. The junction at mile 17 needs management. There's a crowd there that you'd need to deal with. The rural route detour at mile 22 takes you around the propane tanker obstruction on the main road. Once you know the route, I stopped. "I know the route." She looked at me. "I'll go back with your tanker," I said. "I know the fuel system at the station. I can manage the transfer. I'm not in the habit of sending civilians back into." "I know the route," I said again. "I know the pumps. I know what's at the station and how to use it. You can send 10 soldiers with me who've never been there, or you can send 5 soldiers and me." She thought about it for a moment. "Give me 2 hours," she said. "I'll have a team together." 2 hours later, I was back in a vehicle, heading south on Route 9, this time in a convoy of a different kind, 2 armored Humvees and a fuel tanker truck. With a 5-person guard team, I'd briefed on the route and the known problem points. Going south on Route 9, the road looked the same and felt different. I knew what was there now. I knew the junction and the bridge and the access road and the sign on the entrance post. The guard team handled the junction. I'm not going to describe how they did it, except to say they were professional and quick. And when it was done, the junction was clear. We pulled into the gas station from the Route 9 entrance at 10:40 a.m. The place looked exactly the same. The sign on the entrance post, the pump canopy, the plywood on the lower windows, the security gate on the door, which I unlocked with my key, the note I'd left on the counter, still there. Nobody had been through. I took the guard team to the tank access points behind the station. I showed them the manifold equipment. I connected the transfer hose from the tanker truck to the regular fuel access point and showed the team's technical specialist how the transfer valve worked. While the tanker was filling, I walked through the store. It looked lived in, which it had been, for 8 days, by 22 people. There were marks on the floor from foot traffic, a ring on the counter from someone's coffee mug, a spot on the wall near the supply closet where Nate had written today's date every morning. 8 dates in a line. The hot dog roller was cold, hadn't run since the first night. The Christmas lights were still strung up, dim without the generator running. I went to the back room. The security monitor was off. I turned it on. 4 feeds came up. Pump area, empty. Side lot, empty. Back staging area, the guard team and the tanker truck and the 2 Humvees, road, empty. I sat down on the milk crate. 3 years working this shift, every night, midnight to 6, mostly alone, radio on, receipt paper and whatever I'd brought to read, and the 2 hot dogs on the roller that I never actually ate. The fluorescent light above pump 3 flickering every 40 seconds like a heartbeat. 8 days that changed everything. The transfer took about an hour. We got 3,000 gallons into the tanker, the rest of the regular fuel, leaving just enough in the tank to keep the pump system primed. The diesel we left. The tanker's capacity was maxed. Before we drove away, I did one more thing. I went to the pump 3 area. I looked at the light above pump 3. It was not flickering. Without the main power running, it was just off. I didn't know what to do with that exactly. So I just looked at it for a moment and then got into the Humvee. We drove north. Back at the staging area, the tanker of fuel changed the situation in a practical and morale sense simultaneously. Captain Walsh ordered an immediate fuel distribution to the most critical vehicles, the generator trucks and the guard vehicles first, then distribution vehicles. The staging area's operational lifespan extended measurably. I'm going to tell you what happened over the next several days in a way that doesn't pretend I was at the center of it, because I wasn't. The guard unit was running the operation. I was one civilian among hundreds who'd arrived and who were being processed and housed and fed and incorporated into whatever this was becoming. What I was, specifically, useful, not heroic, useful. I knew fuel logistics. I knew Route 9. I knew the warehouse 12 miles south. I knew the neighborhoods and the infrastructure of the Dillon area in a way that nobody at the staging area did, because I'd spent 3 years driving those roads at odd hours and knowing which stores got which deliveries on which days. Captain Walsh put me to work. Which is to say, she asked me questions and I answered them. And the information fed into decisions that were being made at a scale I couldn't fully see. The warehouse. 2 days after we arrived, a guard logistics team made the run to Carl's warehouse with Carl guiding them. They came back with what was left of the inventory. It wasn't everything, but it was substantial. The farmhouse on the rural route detour. I told Captain Walsh about the lights. A team went to investigate. They found a family of 4 parents, 2 teenage daughters, who'd been sheltering there since the beginning. They came back to the staging area. I didn't meet them that day, but I saw them arrive. The 4 of them, slightly dazed, looking around at the staging area with that specific expression I'd gotten familiar with. The expression of realizing you're not alone anymore. Gary and Diane stayed at the staging area for 3 days and then, with Captain Walsh's blessing and a full tank of fuel and a radio and a map, they drove north. They had family in Minnesota. They had dogs to get somewhere safe. Gary shook my hand before he left, which for Gary was essentially an emotional declaration. Diane hugged me, which was less surprising. Ron stayed. With his experience managing a truck and with the supply runs happening, he was in his element. He drove for Walsh's logistics team for as long as I knew what happened there. Kyle got a call through to his parents in Nebraska on day 3 at the staging area through the guard's communication system. They were alive. They were in a stable situation. The route to Nebraska was not currently viable, but the information that they were alive changed everything about his psychological state. I watched him process it from a distance, and I thought about what it would have meant to me to get that kind of news. And I thought about Pete, who I still didn't have news about. Greta absorbed fully into the medical operation at the staging area. She was the most professionally useful person we'd brought, and Captain Walsh recognized it. Nate stayed with her, quietly helpful in the way of 17-year-olds who are paying close attention to everything happening around them and storing it somewhere they'll draw on for the rest of their lives. Harold, in his own way, was fine. He ate well and slept well, and asked cheerful questions that nobody quite knew how to answer. He thought we were camping for most of it, which was arguably accurate. Francis, who was 84 and sharp, told me on day 3 that she'd been a logistics manager for a major industrial firm for 30 years, and that she'd been following the supply management situation at the staging area closely and had 17 specific recommendations. I introduced her to Captain Walsh's supply sergeant. They spent 4 hours talking. Some of the recommendations got implemented within 48 hours. I like to think that mattered. And me. What happened to me? On day 4 at the staging area, a vehicle arrived from the east. An emergency management vehicle, state level, with 2 people in it who were clearly not National Guard civilian crisis management, is what they identified themselves as. They were doing an assessment of the staging area and its capacity and its resource status, which meant they were talking to Captain Walsh, and they were talking to anyone Walsh pointed them to. Walsh pointed them to me. I spent an hour talking to a woman named Karen Alves, who had a clipboard and a laptop and the specific exhausted but functional energy of a government official who'd been awake for 6 days straight. She asked detailed questions about the gas station, the fuel reserves, the supply chain, the survivor throughput, the trade system, the physical setup, the decision-making process. At the end of it, she said, "You managed a fuel distribution point for 8 days, kept 260 vehicles moving north, organized supply runs to a regional warehouse, and established a health screening protocol that other incoming survivors confirmed hearing about from people they'd spoken to on the road. We did all of that. I said. It wasn't just me. She wrote something on her clipboard. We're establishing a network, she said. Safe stops, supply points, on the major corridors. People can't all come here. This location isn't big enough. We need nodes, points along the route. I looked at her. The gas station on Route 9, she said. If we can clear and secure the junction and the surrounding area, which is a known problem point, from multiple reports, that location could function as a node. Fuel, supplies, health screening, information relay. I left a note, I said. She looked at me. On the counter, I said. I left a note saying fuel available for whoever came next. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she wrote something else on her clipboard. Can you go back? She said. I thought about that. I thought about the flickering light above pump 3, about the milk crate in the back room, about the hot dog roller and the Doritos and the radio playing mid-range country, and the moment when the music cut out and the emergency broadcast started and everything changed, about whether I wanted to go back. Yeah, I said. I can go back. She nodded and made another note. I went back to Route 9 the following morning in a convoy of 3 guard vehicles and a logistics truck, with a team of 6, with Karen Alves's network map in my head, with the specific knowledge of how to connect a transfer hose to a ground fuel system, and how to keep a group of survivors organized, and how to make bad coffee on a hot plate, and why that matters. The junction on County 7 had been cleared by a guard patrol 2 days prior. The propane tanker on the main road had been moved by a guard recovery vehicle. The bridge at mile 12 had been checked and secured. Route 9 back to the gas station was clean. We pulled into the lot at 7:15 a.m. The sign was still on the entrance post. I unlocked the front door of the store, went to the counter, picked up the note I'd left, put it back down. The generator was still there. The supplies we'd left in the shed, the pumps, the tanks with their remaining fuel, the Christmas lights, the 8 dates on the wall. I stood behind the counter for a moment. The light above pump 3 was off, still off, no power running yet. I went to the maintenance bay, found the extension cord, ran it to the generator, fired the generator. The store lights came on. The cooler units hummed. The security monitor blinked on. Pump 3 exterior light. I went to look at it. It was on, steady, not flickering. I went to check the wiring habit, really, because I'd been meaning to look at it for 8 days. The wire running to the housing had a loose connection at the junction box, the kind of thing a maintenance request wasn't going to fix, because Greg would never actually send anyone. The kind of thing you have to just do yourself, because waiting for someone else to do it doesn't work. I tightened the connection. The light stayed steady. I went back inside. The guard team was setting up outside, establishing a perimeter, checking the surrounding area. Someone was on a radio. Someone was making a list of what was in the shed. I went to the back room and sat on the milk crate and looked at the security monitor. 4 feeds, pump area, team working, side lot, clear, staging area, vehicles, rode a car, coming from the south, moving carefully, slowing at the entrance. A car, someone coming. I got up, walked out of the back room, through the store, to the door. The car pulled into the lot. A station wagon, older, the kind you don't see much anymore. It stopped at pump 1. The driver's door opened. A man got out, late 40s, glasses, khaki jacket. He stood beside his car and looked at the gas station, and then at the sign on the entrance post, and then at me, standing in the doorway. "Is this?" he started. "Yeah," I said. "Pull around back. We'll do a health check and then we can talk about fuel." He looked at me. Something in his face, the specific relief of someone who has been driving towards something that might not exist and found out it does. "Okay," he said. He got back in his car. I watched him drive around to the staging area. Then I went inside and checked on the coffee situation, because there was going to be a lot of this, and coffee was the thing that kept it from becoming just a transaction. The light above pump 3 held steady. That's where I'm stopping. Not because the story ends there, it doesn't, exactly, or it ends in a dozen directions at once, some of which I know and some I don't. Pete came back 3 weeks later, alive, without his family but with 2 other people he'd found. And that's a story he'll have to tell. The network Karen Alves was building became something real, something that mattered, though I wasn't there for all of it. Kyle drove to Nebraska in May with a guard escort. on a route that had been assessed as clear. I wasn't there for that either. What I was there for. Route 9, 4 miles outside of Dillon, the night shift at a gas station where the light above pump 3 flickered for 8 weeks before I fixed it myself on the 9th day of the end of the world.